The floodlights of police cars cut through the darkness of the October evening looming over Detroit. 42 Oakland Street drowned in a mix of red and blue flashes, turning the normally quiet suburb into a surreal movie scene. Rain, fine and cold, began to drizzle from low-hanging clouds, creating misty halos around the streetlights. Detective Deontay Parker stepped slowly out of the unremarkable sedan, wrinkling his nose at the small drops that caught the collar of his shirt. 38 years on the Detroit police force had left a network of wrinkles on his dark face, giving him both a tired and imposing look. His eyes, dark brown and shrewd, quickly assessed the situation around the house where he was to do the hardest part of the detective's job. His partner, Lavon Brooks, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a short haircut and a perpetually tired look, slammed the car door and walked over to him. "I hate this part of the job," Parker muttered, pulling a tattered notepad from his inside jacket pocket. His voice, deep and husky, sounded quiet, but seemed almost palpable in the evening silence. 38 years, and I'm still not used to breaking news like this." Brooks only nodded, unable to find the right words. They stood in front of the house, gathering their thoughts before knocking. The two-story brick house, with its neat lawn and flower beds, looked like a model of middle-class prosperity. It was hard to imagine that the owner of this house had been found dead in the city's industrial district a few hours ago, his body cut up so brutally that even seasoned forensic scientists averted their eyes. "Leroy Diggs," Parker pronounced, flipping through a notebook whose pages were slightly wet from the rain. 45 years old, owner of an auto parts store on Woodward Avenue, married, no children. Found this morning in an abandoned warehouse by the river. Multiple stab wounds. Medical examiner says it was a real massacre. Brooks grimaced, his broad shoulders slumping slightly. Someone hated him a lot. 11 stab wounds, most in the chest and neck area. Not just a murder, an execution. And we're going to have to find out who. Parker closed his notebook and headed determinedly for the front door, his footsteps leaving wet footprints on the sidewalk. 3 confident knocks on the door echoed hollowly. It took nearly half a minute before leisurely footsteps were heard inside. The door slowly opened and a woman stood before the detectives. Chanel Diggs was a beautiful woman with brown skin and short curly hair that elegantly framed her oval face. Now her eyes, large and expressive, were red from recent tears, and her face was frozen with an expression of worry mixed with exhaustion. "Mrs. Diggs?" Parker asked, showing his badge, the gilding of which gleamed dimly in the dim light of the hallway. "I'm Detective Parker. This is my partner, Detective Brooks. We're from Homicide. May I come in?" Chanel froze in the doorway, her eyes widened with horror. Her fingers frantically gripped the doorknob as if looking for support. "Homicide? Did something happen to Leroy?" Her voice trembled, but there was more foreboding than surprise in it, which didn't escape Parker's attention. "Ma'am, we'd better talk inside," Brooks suggested softly, his deep voice sounding soothing, though his eyes read sympathy and wariness. The woman stepped back automatically, letting the detectives into the house. It was warm and cozy inside. Framed photos on the walls depicted a smiling couple at different moments of their lives. A soft sofa with colorful cushions invited to sit down. Neatly arranged books on the shelves spoke of order and attention to detail. An ordinary, happy life that was about to be shattered by the words the detectives were about to utter. Chanel sank to the edge of the living room couch, her hands restlessly rubbing the hem of her homemade dress. The room was tastefully decorated. Light-colored walls, dark furniture, a few abstract paintings in a modern style. On the coffee table was a photograph, Chanel and a middle-aged man, both smiling, holding hands against the ocean. "That's Leroy, isn't it? Did something happen to him? He didn't come home last night. Didn't answer his cell phone." Her voice broke, and she took a deep breath, trying to pull herself together. Parker sat down across from her, leaning forward and clasping his hands together. His massive figure seemed out of place among the elegant furniture. Brooks remained standing by the door as if guarding the exit, his attentive gaze sliding around the room, noting details, a new big-screen TV, an expensive sound system, fresh flowers in a vase. The home of a man who was doing well. "Mrs. Diggs, I'm very sorry to tell you this. Your husband's body was discovered this morning. According to preliminary reports, it's a homicide." Parker said the words in an even professional tone, but something akin to sympathy flashed in his eyes. He'd uttered the phrase hundreds of times in his career, and each time it sounded like a judgment, not just for the victim, but for those left to live with the loss. The silence that followed those words was palpable. Chanel froze, as if transformed into a statue. Her eyes glazed over, her gaze staring somewhere through the detective. Then she made a sound, not a scream or a sob, but something in between, a low, muffled groan, as if something vital had been ripped out of her. Her hands rose to her face, fingers pressing hard into her skin, leaving red marks. "No," she whispered, rocking back and forth. "No, this is a mistake. It can't be Leroy, not him." "We've identified him from his driver's license and fingerprints," Brooks explained, his voice sounding softer than usual. "And we'll need you to formally identify the body when you're ready." Chanel covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with the sobs she was trying to hold back. Tears trickled through her fingers, leaving dark paths on her cheeks. The detectives waited silently, giving her time to realize what had happened. The room began to hear the ticking of the wall clock, an inexorable reminder that time marches on, regardless of tragedy and loss. Finally, Parker pulled a plastic evidence bag from his pocket that contained a photograph. He placed it on the coffee table in front of Chanel. "Did this ring belong to your husband?" The photograph was a gold ring with an engraved band inside. Chanel lowered her hands and looked at the picture, her face contorted with a new wave of pain, as if this image finally confirmed the reality of what was happening. "Yes," she exhaled, struggling to control her voice. "It's Leroy's engagement ring. I got him a new one for his 5th wedding anniversary, engraved, 'Forever yours.' Shh. He never took it off." "It was found next to the body," Parker said, picking up the photo and carefully returning it to the bag. "Mrs. Diggs, we need to ask you some questions. It will help us find whoever did this." Chanel looked up, tears in her eyes, but she nodded, showing her willingness to cooperate. Something else began to emerge through the pain and shock: determination, or perhaps a need to understand why this happened. "Who would do such a thing?" Her voice became firmer, a genuine perplexity in it. "Leroy never hurt anyone. Everyone loved him. He was a good man." "When was the last time you saw your husband?" Brooks asked, pulling a notepad and pen from the inside pocket of his jacket. Chanel ran a hand through her hair, trying to gather her thoughts. Her eyes paused for a moment on the photograph on the table. "Yesterday morning, before work. He was as usual, calm, in a good mood. Said he'd be late at the store, inventory or something. We kissed before he left." Her voice shook on the last words. "When he didn't come back for dinner, I called, but he didn't answer. I thought maybe he was out with friends. Sometimes he does that. Didn't want to be a clingy wife." Her voice broke again and she covered her face with her hands, unable to hold back a new wave of emotion. Her shoulders shuddered with silent sobs. Brooks held out a box of tissues to her on a nearby table. "Mrs. Diggs, did your husband have any enemies?" Parker asked softly when the woman had calmed down a bit. "Someone he had conflicts with, maybe over work?" Chanel shook her head, wiping her tears with a tissue. "Leroy was the kindest man I knew. He was respected by everyone. He worked in a machine store for 20 years before he saved enough to open his own store. 3 years ago, it happened. He was so proud." A shadow of a smile flashed across her face, quickly replaced by a grimace of pain. "The store was doing well. The customers loved him. Leroy was always honest, never overpriced, helped those in need." "What about your personal life?" Brooks asked cautiously, watching the woman's reaction carefully. "Did your husband have any secrets?" Chanel tensed, her gaze darting to the detective and then away, her hands that held the napkin visibly clenched, crumpling the thin paper. "I don't know what you mean." Her voice became a little higher, a note of defense in it. Parker noted the reaction but decided not to press. It was too early for a direct confrontation. More information needed to be gathered first. "Just standard questions, ma'am. We need to get a complete picture of your husband's life to see who might have wished him harm." The woman nodded, but something in her demeanor changed. It was as if she had shut down, withdrawn into herself, her gaze becoming more cautious, assessing. "Of course I understand. But Leroy had no secrets. At least from me." She said the last words more quietly, as if she wasn't entirely sure they were true. Who are your closest friends or relatives? Parker changed the subject. Someone to be with you during this difficult time. Chanel relaxed a little, clearly relieved at the change in direction of the conversation. The Wiltshires live across the street, she answered quietly. Ezekiel and Tanisha. We've been family friends for 15 years. Their son Jabari and Leroy were... She stammered, picking up the word, her fingers beginning to nervously rub the napkin again. Close. Brooks raised an eyebrow, glancing over to Parker. Close? Yeah, like father and son, Chanel quickly added, noticing the detective's interest. Leroy and I didn't have children of our own, and Jabari always reached for male company. Ezekiel worked a lot when Jabari was a teenager. Leroy often took the boy fishing, taught him how to repair cars. They were attached to each other. Something uncertain slipped into her voice, not quite bitterness, but not a simple statement of fact either. Parker made a mental note to pay special attention to that relationship. Understood, Parker nodded, making a note in his notebook. We'd like to talk to them. Maybe they know something or have noticed something unusual lately. Sure, Chanel rubbed her hands together restlessly. They'll be shocked, especially Jabari. He's very attached to Leroy. The detectives asked a few more routine questions about Leroy's daily routine, his habits, recent calls or visitors, unusual occurrences. Chanel answered calmly. But the longer the conversation went on, the more Parker noticed inconsistencies and omissions in her answers. She seemed to be telling the truth, but not the whole truth, leaving out something important. Finally, the detectives rose to leave. At the door, Parker turned around, his massive figure seeming even more imposing against the doorway. Mrs. Diggs, if you think of anything that might help with the investigation, anything at all, please give us a call. He handed her a business card with his name and phone number printed on it. My condolences. It's a tough loss. Chanel Diggs took the card, her fingers trembling slightly. Find whoever did this, she said quietly, looking straight into the detective's eyes. Please. Once outside, the detectives walked in silence toward the house across the street. The rain had intensified, droplets pounding monotonously on the roofs of parked cars. The Wiltshire house was more modest than the Diggses, a single-story, one-story house with a somewhat neglected lawn and an old dark blue pickup truck in the driveway. The paint on the door was starting to peel, and one of the windows was taped up with duct tape instead of properly repaired. The lifestyle here was clearly different from what they'd seen at the victim's house. What do you think? Brooks asked as they crossed the street, trying to avoid the puddles. Parker rubbed his chin thoughtfully, where the evening stubble was beginning to show. There's something she's not telling you. Did you notice how she reacted when we asked about her husband's secrets? And that mention of intimacy between Leroy and the neighbor's son? Something's not right here. You think she's involved? Brooks lifted the collar of his jacket, trying to shield himself from the rain. It's too early to tell, but my instinct tells me this isn't a random attack. The victim wasn't robbed, and the murder was too violent, too personal. Someone really wanted Leroy Diggs dead, and that someone probably knew him personally. The door of the Wiltshire house opened after the second bell rang. A large woman with a tired face and a worried look stood on the threshold. Tanisha Wiltshire looked about 45, but a hard life and constant worry had added to her age. Her skin, dark brown and smooth, contrasted with the greying hair gathered in a tight bundle at the back of her head. She was dressed in simple work clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, her hands showing signs of homework. Mrs. Wiltshire, Tanisha Wiltshire, Parker asked, showing his badge. I'm Detective Parker, this is Detective Brooks. We're investigating a case involving your neighbor, Leroy Diggs. May I come in? The woman's face contorted with alarm, her eyes widened, and the hand holding the doorknob visibly tensed. Has something happened to Leroy? Does Chanel know? We've just been to see Mrs. Diggs, Brooks replied, trying to speak calmly and professionally. We'd like to ask you a few questions, if possible. Tanisha stepped back, letting the detectives into the house. Inside was dark and cramped, the furniture shabby but clean, the walls covered with simple framed pictures of the family. The living room was small, with a couch that had seen better days and a television that seemed to be the most expensive item in the room. In one of the photos, Parker noticed a young man in work clothes next to an older man, presumably Jabari and his father. The young man had an athletic build and an accommodating smile. His eyes, even in the photo, radiated energy and cheerfulness. "Ezekiel! Ezekiel, come here!" called out Tanisha in the back of the house. "The police are here asking about Leroy." From the hallway came a tall, wiry man in his 50s with graying hair and a hard stare. Ezekiel Wiltshire moved with the dignity of a man used to relying only on himself. His hands were calloused, the hands of a man accustomed to physical labor. He was dressed simply but neatly. Dark pants and a blue shirt rolled up to the elbows, exposing strong, wiry forearms. "What happened to Leroy?" he asked in a husky voice that had a note of worry and wariness in it. Parker sighed, preparing to say the hard words for the second time that day. "Mr. Wiltshire, I'm sorry to report, but Leroy Diggs was found dead this morning. According to our records, it's a homicide." Tanisha ahed, settling back into the nearest chair, her hand instinctively rising to her lips as if trying to hold back a scream. "God, no, poor Chanel! How could this have happened?" "Oh." Ezekiel Wiltshire froze in place, his face impenetrable as if carved from dark wood. Only his eyes betrayed the inner turmoil. They narrowed, something resembling anger or perhaps fear flashed in them. Murder? Who could have? Leroy was a good man. "We were hoping you might be able to help us look into this," Brooks said, taking out a notepad. "Mrs. Diggs said you two were close friends." 15 years, yes, Ezekiel nodded, his gaze never leaving the floor. "We met when we moved here. Leroy helped me get a job when the factory closed. He was a good man, a true friend." Tanisha nodded, wiping away the tears that had begun to flow down her cheeks. "We owe him a lot. He was always kind to us, especially Jabari. Leroy was almost like a second father to him." Parker noted how Ezekiel tensed slightly at those words, his hands clenched into fists before he consciously relaxed them. "When was the last time you saw Mr. Diggs?" Parker asked, pulling out a notepad. Ezekiel faltered, rubbing his chin, his gaze darting to his wife before returning to the detective. "A couple days ago, I guess. Haven't seen much of each other lately." Parker noted it in his notebook, his pencil leaving a clear mark on the rain-damp paper. "Why? Was there a fight between you two?" Ezekiel straightened slightly, his shoulders tensing as if preparing for defense. "No, just work, you know. I'm at the construction site, he's at his store. Everybody's got their own thing going on." Tanisha cast a quick glance at her husband, something akin to surprise flashing in her eyes. But she remained silent, lowering her head and continuing to rub the edge of her blouse. "Is your son home?" Brooks asked suddenly, his voice sounding deceptively casual. "Jabari, right?" Tanisha and Ezekiel exchanged quick glances that read concern and something else like tacit agreement. "Yes, he should be in his room," Tanisha replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Jabari, come down here, please. The police are here." Footsteps were heard from the back of the house, slow and uncertain at first, then more determined. A few moments later, a young man emerged from the hallway. Tall, athletically built, with short cropped hair and a tense look in his eyes. Jabari Wiltshire was dressed in a simple white t-shirt and jeans, but even in these casual clothes he looked unusually attractive. His face, with clear features as if sculpted by a sculptor, now expressed a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "What's wrong?" he asked, shifting his gaze from his parents to the strangers in the smart suits. "Jabari, these are Detectives Parker and Brooks," Tanisha introduced, her voice sounding unaccustomedly formal. "They're investigating Leroy's death." The young man's face changed instantly. The color seemed to fade from his cheeks, leaving his skin an ashy gray. He took 2 steps back as if from a blow. "What? Leroy is dead? How? When did this happen?" His voice trembled, notes of genuine shock and pain audible in it. "His body was found this morning," Parker replied, watching the young man's reaction carefully. "When was the last time you saw Mr. Diggs?" Jabari ran a hand nervously through his short-cropped hair, his eyes darting around the room as if avoiding the detective's direct gaze. "Yeah, don't remember exactly. Maybe a week ago?" "A week," Brooks interjected, making a note in his notebook. "And you don't remember under what circumstances you saw each other?" "Just on the street, saying hello." Jabari avoided making eye contact with the detectives. His hands restlessly rubbed the edges of his t-shirt, formerly off-white but now with small paint stains, the marks of construction work. Parker noticed Ezekiel watching his son with growing tension. His hands were clenched into fists so tight that his knuckles turned white and the veins in his forearms showed through like ropes. "Mr. Diggs and you were close, right?" the detective asked, shifting his gaze from father to son. "Mrs. Diggs mentioned that you were like father and son." "Yeah, when I was younger," Jabari answered quickly, his voice sounding strained. He was a good man. Taught me a lot of things. Fixing cars, fishing, stuff like that." Something in his voice, a tremor, a nadir, made Parker wary. It wasn't just sadness at the loss of his mentor. There was a deeper, more personal pain in those words. The detective caught the way Ezekiel clenched his fists even tighter, his face tense and his eyes narrowed as if preparing for a fight. "Did Mr. Diggs ever mention any problems, threats, conflicts?" Parker continued, keeping his eyes on the young man. "Anything out of the ordinary lately?" "No, nothing," Jabari replied, still avoiding eye contact. "Leroy has been a quiet man. Everyone respected him." "Do you work construction like your father?" Brooks changed the subject, his tone more casual. "Yeah, for 3 years now," Jabari nodded, visibly relaxing at the change of subject. "Went to my dad's construction site after high school. The pay is good there, and the work is, well, normal." "Where were you last night, between 7 o'clock and midnight?" The question, asked in a calm, almost careless tone, had the effect of a bomb going off. Jabari flinched, his gaze darting to his father and then to his mother, as if looking for clues or support. "Yeah, I was at home, watching TV. Can anyone confirm that?" "Me," Tanisha quickly interjected, her voice sounding an octave higher than usual. "We watched a movie together. Ezekiel was home too. We were all home, the whole family." Parker nodded, making a note. Something was definitely off in this family. The tension in the room could have been cut with a knife. It was clear that all three were hiding something, and that something had everything to do with Leroy Diggs. "Jabari," the detective stepped forward, shortening the distance between himself and the young man. "We need to ask you a few more questions. It would be best to do it at the station." "At the station," Tanisha shrieked, her face contorted with fear. "Why? My son hasn't done anything! He was home with us all night!" "It's just standard procedure, ma'am," Brooks replied, his voice sounding soothing. "Your son is not under arrest. We just want to learn more about his relationship with the victim and perhaps get some information that will aid in the investigation." Ezekiel stepped forward, stepping between his son and the detectives. His figure, tall and wiry, radiated menace like a taut spring ready to straighten at any moment. "My son isn't going anywhere. You can't make him. Unless you have a warrant or charges, you have no right." Parker met Ezekiel's gaze calmly, not giving in to the provocation. Then he slowly shifted his gaze to Jabari, standing behind his father's back. "Jabari, if you have nothing to hide, this is just a formal conversation to help us find your friend's killer. If you refuse to cooperate, we can come back with a warrant and then things will get much more serious." The young man looked cornered. His gaze darted between his parents and the detectives, reading the internal struggle. Fear and something else. Something like a need to speak out, to be free of the weight of the mystery. "I'll go," he finally said quietly but firmly. "I haven't done anything. I want to help find who did it." "Jabari, no!" Ezekiel exclaimed, his voice breaking on the last word. He turned to his son, his face contorted with a mixture of fear and anger. "You don't have to go anywhere. They're just trying to blame it on someone else." "Dad, it's okay." Jabari put a hand on his father's shoulder, his voice sounding surprisingly calm for a man in this situation. "I don't have anything to hide. I want to help the investigation." Ezekiel tensed, his face contorted with worry and fear. Parker couldn't pinpoint the exact emotion, but something in the man's reaction seemed excessive for the situation. It wasn't just a father's fear for his son, but something deeper, more personal. "We'll get your son back as soon as we're done talking," Brooks assured the parents. "You can come to the station if you want. Wait in the waiting room or even be present for the conversation if Jabari doesn't mind." "I'll be there," Ezekiel stated firmly, his gaze becoming hard and determined. "Let me get the car keys." He quickly disappeared down the hallway, his footsteps sounding heavy and determined. Tanisha hugged her son, whispering something in his ear. Jabari nodded, his face pale but determined. Parker turned to Brooks and said quietly, "Something is definitely wrong here. The father's too nervous. The son clearly knows more than he's saying." "I agree," Brooks nodded. "The kid knows more than he's saying, and I'm willing to bet his relationship with Diggs was more complicated than just mentor and mentee." The interrogation room at the Detroit police station was typical. Bare walls painted a dull grey-green, a simple metal table, 3 chairs, and a large mirror that hid the observation room. Jabari Wiltshire sat with his hands clasped in front of him on the desk, his eyes downcast, his shoulders tense. Parker and Brooks sat across from him, a thin folder of photographs and preliminary crime scene reports lying between them. "Jabari," Parker began, his voice sounding calm and professional, "we're not here to accuse you of anything. We just want to know the truth about your relationship with Leroy Diggs and what may have led to his death." The young man was silent, his fingers nervously interlaced, his hands showing calluses from hard work on the construction site. He looked like a man who was used to physical labor, but right now, his strength and stamina couldn't help him deal with the emotional stress. "Your father is waiting in the waiting room," Parker continued. "But you're a grown man, and this conversation will remain between us, unless you had something to do with the murder." Jabari looked up, tears in his eyes, which he tried to hold back. "I didn't kill him," he said quietly but firmly. "I would never hurt Leroy." There was such genuine pain in his voice that even Brooks, who had seen all manner of suspect tricks, believed him. "Then tell us the truth," Brooks asked gently. "When was the last time you actually saw Leroy?" Jabari took a deep breath, as if gathering his strength for a leap into the cold water. His shoulders slumped, as if he was shedding a heavy weight from them. "The night before last, we met at his store after hours." "Why?" Parker asked, maintaining the calm, casual tone of the conversation. The young man closed his eyes, his shoulders slumped even lower, as if under an invisible weight. We had a relationship." There was silence in the room, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights and the barely audible creak of the chair as Brooks shifted slightly in his seat. The detectives glanced around, exchanging a silent confirmation of their suspicions. "Relationship?" Brooks clarified, though the answer was obvious. "Of what kind?" "Romantic." Jabari opened his eyes, a look of determination and something else, relief, as if he'd finally shed the weight of a secret. "We dated for almost a year. Secretly, of course. No one knew. At least that's what we thought." Parker leaned back in his chair, processing this information. It explained a lot. The tension in the Wiltshire household, Chanel's strange behavior, Ezekiel's unusual reaction. "You say you had an affair with Leroy Diggs, who was 20 years older than you, and married to a woman who lived across the street from your parents?" "Yes." Jabari straightened up, as if preparing to defend his feelings. "I know how that sounds, but it's true. It started by accident. I used to help him at the store on the weekends, moonlighting there sometimes. We talked a lot. He was different from everyone else around him. He understood me, my dreams, my fears. He didn't judge. There was a genuine tenderness in his voice when he spoke of Leroy, a feeling that was hard to imitate. His eyes stared off into the distance, as if he saw before him not the wall of the interrogation room, but the face of a loved one. "Did Chanel know about this?" Brooks asked, making notes in his notebook. Jabari faltered, his gaze dropping to his hands again. I'm not sure. Sometimes I thought she was guessing. There were times when she looked at me strangely when I went to their house, but we were very careful. We'd meet at the store after hours or sometimes go out of town where no one knew us." "And your parents?" The young man tensed, his gaze hard. "No, they wouldn't have understood, especially my father. He's very traditional. To him, family is husband, wife, children. He doesn't recognize anything else. He's always been proud of me. I'm his only son, the continuation of the family. If he were to find out..." Jabari didn't finish the sentence, but there was fear in his voice, not for himself, but for his father's reaction, for what this would do to their relationship. Parker made a note in his notebook. The picture was beginning to take shape, but there were still a lot of questions. "Tell us about your last meeting," the detective asked. "The night before last at the store." Jabari rubbed his face with his hands as if trying to gather his thoughts. "It was a normal evening. I came in around 8 after work. The store was already closed to customers. We talked, had a little wine. Leroy had a small collection. He liked good wine. He seemed restless, not his usual self. Said he had some things to think about, but didn't explain what. We were together for a couple hours, just talking, being close. We parted around 10 o'clock at night. He was going to close up store and go home. And that was the last time you saw him? He didn't call, didn't text. No. I sent him a text yesterday morning, wished him a good day as usual. But he didn't reply. I didn't pay much attention to it. He had days when he was busy or just didn't want to socialize. He said sometimes he needed space, time to think. Parker leaned forward, his massive figure seeming even more imposing in the cramped space of the interrogation room. Jabari, do you know anyone who might have wanted to harm Leroy? Who might have found out about your relationship and reacted aggressively? The young man tensed, his gaze becoming fearful, as if the detective's question had awakened some disturbing suspicion in him. Yeah, I don't know. Have you ever thought of telling your father? Brooks asked suddenly. How do you think he'd react? Jabari turned pale, his hands involuntarily clenched into fists. He wouldn't have understood. My father always dreamed I would marry, have children, continue the lineage. It's important to him, almost sacred. He always talked about grandchildren, how he'd teach them everything he knew. So important that he could remove the obstacle? Parker asked, watching carefully for a reaction. What? No! Jabari jumped up, his chair clattering backward. My father is not a murderer. He would never... He's strict, yes, sometimes harsh, but he's not capable of such a thing. Sit down, please, Brooks asked calmly. We're just looking at all the leads. That's our job. Jabari slowly lowered himself into the chair, his face contorted with pain and internal struggle. My father couldn't have done this. He didn't even know. No one knew. Are you sure? Parker asked. Absolutely sure no one found out about your relationship. Maybe someone saw you two together. Or did Leroy tell someone? The young man fell silent, his gaze becoming detached, as if he were remembering something, going over the events of the last few days. A week ago, Leroy said he wanted to change everything, that he was tired of hiding. He said life was too short to waste it on lies and pretense. He was going to tell Chanel, ask for a divorce. Jabari shook his head. I said it was crazy, that we couldn't do that to our families, that it would ruin everything, both his marriage and my relationship with my parents. And what did he say? He said he loved me, that he wanted a real life, not sneaking around, that he was willing to risk everything for us. Jabari covered his face with his hands. I was scared, said I needed time to think, that I wasn't ready for that kind of change. You think he told Chanel after all? Brooks asked. Jabari looked up, realization red in his eyes. Probably. It would explain why he was so restless the last time we met. Maybe they had a serious conversation and he didn't know how to tell me about it. Parker and Brooks exchanged glances. The picture was becoming clearer, but not complete. Chanel was definitely hiding something, and now they knew what it was. Jabari, where were you last night? Parker asked again. And this time, the truth. The young man lowered his gaze, his shoulders slumped. I was at home, really. I got home around 6 after work and didn't go out. I waited for a call or text from Leroy, but he didn't contact me. I thought maybe he needed time to think after our conversation. Can anyone confirm that? Parents. We had dinner together, then watched TV. Some old movie, can't remember the title. Parker tapped his pen on his notepad, mulling over the situation. Your parents will confirm your alibi. But I have to ask, who do you think could have killed Leroy? Who could have known about your relationship and reacted that way? Jabari shook his head slowly, his eyes filling with tears that he no longer tried to hide. I really don't. He had no enemies. Everyone loved him. He was kind, honest, always helping people. I don't understand who would do something like that. Including Chanel? Brooks clarified. How did she feel about her husband lately? I think she had a hunch. Sometimes looked at me strangely when I came to see them. But Leroy said there had been no real feelings between them for a long time. A marriage of habit, he called it. They lived together, but they were like neighbors, not husband and wife. Parker made another note. Everything pointed to the classic triangle husband, wife, and lover. But which one of them could have gotten to the point of murder? Or was there someone else? Jabari, I want you to think very carefully. Has there been anything unusual lately? Strange calls, visits, arguments? Maybe Leroy said someone was bothering him or threatening him. The young man thought for a moment, his eyebrows drawn together at the bridge of his nose, wrinkles cutting across his forehead. He was really trying to remember, to find something that might help the investigation. 3 days ago, Leroy called me late at night. Around 11, I'd already gone to bed. He was agitated, voice shaking. Said Chanel had found out about us, that they'd had a serious conversation. And what happened next? He said everything was fine, that she'd reacted surprisingly calmly, said she'd known or suspected for a long time, and that the most important thing to her was his happiness. Jabari frowned, as if only now realizing the strangeness of the situation. I didn't give it much thought at the time. I was glad it was without scandal. You believed it? Brooks asked. In such a calm reaction, Jabari shrugged, his face expressing doubt. I don't. It sounded strange, but Leroy seemed genuinely surprised and pleased. He said that now we can be together openly, that he'll talk to my folks. He said that now we can be together openly, that he'll talk to my parents, that things will change for the better. Parker stood up, exchanging a quick glance with Brooks. Wait here, we'll be right back. The detectives stepped out into the hallway, closing the door tightly behind them. The grey linoleum muffled their footsteps, the daylight bulbs flickering under the ceiling, creating an almost ghostly atmosphere. What do you think? Brooks asked. I think we should talk to Chanel Diggs again, Parker replied, and see how the father reacts when he finds out his son admitted to having an affair with Leroy. Ezekiel Wiltshire waited in the waiting room, his massive figure seeming out of place on the plastic chair. What's going on? What's taking so long? He hugged his son with one arm, looking intently at the detectives. Mr. Wiltshire, we have a few more questions for you, Parker said. It's best if we speak privately. Ezekiel frowned, his gaze becoming suspicious. Why? I don't know anything about the murder. Please, Mr. Wiltshire, Brooks insisted. It won't take long. Ezekiel turned to his son, placing heavy hands on his shoulders. Wait in the car. I'll be right there. Jabari nodded, avoiding looking his father in the eye, and walked quickly out of the station. His shoulders slumped like a man carrying a heavy load. In the same interrogation room, Ezekiel sat with his arms crossed over his chest, his gaze hard and hostile. His work jacket lay in his lap, exposing strong hands in rolled-up shirt sleeves. Mr. Wiltshire, Parker began, sitting down across from him. Your son has just told us something interesting about his relationship with Leroy Diggs. Ezekiel tensed, his fingers digging into his forearms. What exactly? Jabari admitted that he had an affair with Leroy, Brooks said bluntly, watching for a reaction. A romantic relationship that lasted about a year. Ezekiel froze, his face frozen as if carved from stone. Then he shook his head slowly, lips curved in disbelief. No, that is a lie. My son is not like that. Not like what, Mr. Wiltshire? Parker asked. He's not. That's impossible. Ezekiel's voice trembled with restrained anger. Leroy was his tutor, nothing more. He was helping the boy, teaching him as I asked. You don't need to make up abominations. According to Jabari, their relationship lasted about a year, Brooks continued, and Leroy planned to leave his wife for your son. Ezekiel jumped up, his face contorted with rage. The chair fell to the floor with a clatter. This is an abomination! I will not listen to this! My son is a normal boy! He couldn't! Sit down, Mr. Wiltshire, Parker said firmly. Or we'll continue this conversation in the cell. Ezekiel slowly lowered himself into the chair that Brooks had thoughtfully pulled up. His breathing was heavy and ragged, his face purple with anger. Mr. Wiltshire, where were you last night between 7 o'clock and midnight? Brooks asked, his voice sounding calm but intense. At home with my family, answered Ezekiel without raising his eyes. All evening. You didn't go out? Ezekiel mewed, his fingers clenched into fists, then slowly unclenched. Drove to the store to get a beer. What time? Around 9, maybe. I don't remember exactly. And how long were you out? Half an hour, no more than that. Just drove to the store and back. Parker made a note. What store? 24-hour convenience store on the corner of Woodward and McNichols. They have security cameras, Brooks noted. We'll check it out. Ezekiel swallowed, his anklet twitching, his eyes darting to the door for a moment, as if assessing the distance to the exit. "Please check." "Mr. Wiltshire." Parker leaned forward, his gaze absorbed into his interlocutor's face. "Were you aware of your son's affair with Leroy Diggs before today?" Ezekiel tensed, his eyes darting toward the door as if he were searching for an escape route. "No," he said at last. "I didn't know anything. It's all made up." "Are you sure? Because we've been told that Mrs. Diggs told you about them, that she came to you 3 days ago, upset that her husband was going to leave her for your son." Ezekiel's face changed. Fear changed to anger, then despair. He looked like a man cornered with no way out. "Yeah, I don't want to talk without a lawyer anymore." Parker and Brooks glanced over. They'd gotten what they'd come for, a reaction that spoke more than any words could. "Of course, Mr. Wiltshire," Parker nodded. "That's your right. But before we finish, I'd like you to know, we're going to talk to Mrs. Diggs again and check the store's cameras. And if it turns out that you lied to us..." Ezekiel jumped up, knocking over a chair, his face contorted with anger and despair, the veins in his neck swelling with tension. "He has corrupted my son, spoiled him. 15 years of friendship, and this is how he repaid," he shouted, his face crimson with rage. "Chanel came to me in tears, saying that Leroy was going to leave her for Jabari, that they were planning to leave town. She didn't know what to do." Parker rose, his hand instinctively resting on his gun. "Mr. Wiltshire, calm down." "I couldn't let this happen," Ezekiel continued, already quieter, his voice shaking with restrained emotion. "My son, my only son, Leroy should have left him alone. I just wanted to talk, to explain. But he said he loved Jabari, that they would be together whether I wanted them to be or not. He said there was nothing I could do, that times have changed, that people like him and Jabari were no longer persecuted. He laughed at my faith, at my values." "And what did you do, Ezekiel?" Brooks asked quietly. Ezekiel collapsed in his chair, his shoulders slumped, all rage suddenly gone, leaving behind only devastation and fatigue. "I had a knife in my car, for work. Yeah, I don't remember how it happened. I was so angry. He was laughing, saying that Jabari was never happy with me, that I was a bad father, that I was living in the past." His voice broke. "When I came to my senses, he was lying on the floor. There was so much blood." Parker exhaled slowly, exchanging a look with Brooks. Confession is always a tricky moment for a detective. The triumph of a solved case is mixed with the bitterness of realizing the human tragedy that often underlies it. "Ezekiel Wiltshire, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Leroy Diggs. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you by the state. Do you understand those rights?" Ezekiel covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I just wanted to protect my son," he whispered. "Just to protect him from this temptation, so he could live a normal life, get married, have children." Brooks sighed, placing a hand on the arrested man's shoulder. "Mr. Wiltshire, I'm afraid you've lost your son more securely than if you'd let him live his life." Chanel Diggs was sitting in her living room when the detectives returned. The sun had already set and the room was drowning in semi-darkness, lit only by a desk lamp. Her eyes were red from crying, but she looked collected, almost detached. "Did you find him?" she asked as Parker and Brooks sat down across from her. "Yes," Parker nodded. "Ezekiel Wiltshire confessed to killing your husband." Chanel closed her eyes, her lips trembling. "Did he say why?" "Because of your husband's relationship with his son," Brooks answered. "He found out about them and couldn't accept it." Chanel nodded, as if she'd heard what she'd expected. "Jabari, how is he?" "In shock," Parker said. "Mrs. Diggs, Ezekiel claims you told him about your husband's relationship with Jabari. Is that true?" Chanel opened her eyes, tears standing in them, but her gaze was direct and honest. "Yes, Leroy told me that he loved Jabari, that he wanted to be with him, that our marriage was a mistake." She grinned bitterly. 20 years together, and he calls it a mistake. I was broken, confused. I went to Ezekiel thinking he must know that he could talk to Jabari, convince him. "Did you know that Ezekiel might react with violence?" Brooks asked. Chanel shook her head, but her look was unsure. No, I didn't think. Ezekiel was always so calm, reasonable. I just wanted someone to help me stop this madness, to save our families. You didn't suggest that your conversation with Ezekiel might lead to what happened? Parker asked insistently. Chanel raised a look full of pain at him. If I had known it would lead to Leroy's death, I would never, ever. Her voice broke. She covered her face with her hands. It's my fault, isn't it? I killed him with my words. Parker and Brooks exchanged glances. Technically, she hadn't committed a crime, but morally, it wasn't so clear-cut. Mrs. Diggs, Brooks said softly, you didn't hold the knife. Ezekiel did, but perhaps you should talk to Jabari. He lost both a loved one and his father in the same day. Chanel nodded, wiping away her tears. I'll give it a try, but I don't think he'll want to talk to me. One more thing, Parker added, rising. You'll have to give formal testimony about your conversation with Ezekiel. It could be important to the court. Chanel nodded again, her gaze blank and detached. I understand. I'll tell the truth. The detectives walked out of the Diggs house into the dusky evening. The street seemed quiet and empty. Only the police tape around the Wiltshire house, a reminder of the tragedy that had played out behind the faceless facades of ordinary houses. The rain had stopped, but the air was still damp, filled with the smell of wet asphalt and fallen leaves. Autumn in Detroit always seemed particularly melancholy to Parker, a time of wilting, decay, quiet preparation for death in winter. Sometimes I think we only fix the effects but never prevent the causes, Parker said wistfully, looking up at the darkening sky. How long I've been working, and human nature doesn't change. The same passions, the same fears, the same prejudices. That's the job, Brooks replied, taking out a cigarette and flicking his lighter. The red light flared in the twilight, illuminating the detective's tired face for a moment. People will always do stupid things because of love, fear, prejudice. We just pick up the pieces. They walked in silence toward the car. A light burned in one of the windows of the Diggs house, a lone beacon in the encroaching darkness. At the same time, a few blocks away, a young man with a backpack stood outside the bus station. Jabari Wiltshire was staring at the schedule board, his eyes blank, his face impassive. The bus to Chicago was leaving in 15 minutes. He gripped the ticket tighter in his hand.